For almost 30 years, one idea has followed Final Fantasy VII players everywhere. If you want the Golden Chocobo, you have to race. It's a vice that has been repeated in strategy guides, forum posts, YouTube videos, and conversations between players ever since the game first released. After all, the Golden Chocobo is supposed to be the ultimate reward. A bird capable of reaching places no other Chocobo can, and home to the Knights of the Round Materia, Mime, and Quadramagic, and some of the most powerful rewards in the entire game. So naturally, players accepted the grind. Hours spent racing, hours spent breeding, all because everyone believed the races were part of the requirement. But here's the question almost nobody asked. Why? Why would winning Chocobo races determine the colour of the baby Chocobo? What possible connection could there be between a racetrack and genetics? The answer is there isn't one. The races don't directly determine what you'll hatch. They simply change something happening behind the scenes. Something the game never explains. A hidden sequence of calculations that's constantly changing as you play. With every battle and every menu screen, every action and every decision, understanding that little hidden system changes everything. Because once you know what the game is really tracking, the races stop being a requirement and become just one way of reaching the same destination. Today, we're gonna prove it, not by taking shortcuts, not by using any cheats, but by understanding Final Fantasy VII's breeding system from the inside out. Before we breed a Golden Chocobo, we must first need to understand how the game makes decisions. What if I told you Final Fantasy VII isn't actually random? That every critical hit, every enemy drop, every moment of luck you've ever experienced in the game was never really luck at all? Because underneath the surface of the PS1 version of Final Fantasy VII, there is no chaos. There is only a unique sequence. When you play Final Fantasy VII, the game feels completely unpredictable. Enemies behave differently every fight. Items drop or they don't. It feels alive, like it's rolling dice behind the scenes, but it isn't. What you're actually seeing is something called a pseudo-random number generator, a system designed to imitate randomness using math. The key moment happens before you even begin playing. When the game boots up on the PlayStation 1, it creates the starting valve, a seed. This seed isn't random in the way that we are thinking it. It's the beginning of a long mathematical chain. From that moment onwards, the game doesn't choose random outcomes, it simply moves forward through the pre-generated sequence of numbers. Behind the scenes, Final Fantasy VII is constantly doing the same thing. Taking the current number, applying a formula, and generating the next one. That new number decides everything, whether you land a critical hit, whether an enemy drops an item, whether an attack misses, even how enemies choose their actions. Nothing is rolled fresh, nothing is spontaneous. It is all coming from a single continuous chain. So, why does it feel unpredictable? Because you're moving through that sequence without knowing where you are. Every action you take, every menu you opened, every battle you started, every frame that passes pushes you further along the chain. To you, it feels like luck, but to the game, it's just the next number in the line. This means something important. Final Fantasy VII doesn't simulate randomness, it simulates uncertainty. And there's a difference. Because in a system like this, nothing is ever truly possible or impossible in the moment. It's already decided. You just haven't reached that point in the sequence yet. And once you understand this, the entire game changes. Because if everything is a sequence, then the question becomes, can you control where you are in it? Now here's where this stops being theory and starts becoming something that you have probably already experienced yourself. Because nowhere in Final Fantasy VII does luck feel more real than the Golden Chocobo. Breeding the Golden Chocobo feels like gambling with fate. You race the Chocobos, you catch specific types, you feed them, you breed them, you reset if it fails and you try again. and most players just assume one thing: I just need better RNG. But that's not actually what's happening. The Chocobo breeding system doesn't generate a fresh random outcome every time you try. Instead, it pulls from the same global RNG sequence running through the entire game. That means that every race result, every Chocobo stat roll, every mating outcome is not independent. It's just the next step in the same long chain that we talked about earlier. This is why players get stuck for hours without progress. It's not that the game is being unfair, it's that if you keep repeating the same actions, you're just burning through the RNG sequence in a predictable pattern. So when you fail a breeding attempt, then immediately try it again the same way. You are often landing on another nearby position in the same bad stretch of that sequence. But here is the crucial part. Final Fantasy VII's Chocobo breeding doesn't just rely on one roll. It's using multiple RNG checks layered together, including Chocobo sex determination, stat inheritance, racing performance, hidden compatibility values, random encounter triggers during setup. Each of these pulls from the same continuous RNG stream. So, what feels like one attempt is actually several chained random outcomes stacked together. Golden Chocobo isn't rare because it's a single lucky roll. It's rare because you must land the correct combination of multiple RNG states in sequence. If one step is off, wrong stats, wrong pairing, wrong race outcome, the chain breaks, and you don't get progress. You just move further along the sequence and try again. So when players say, "It took me hours to get the Golden Chocobo," what they really mean is, "It took me hours to naturally drift through the RNG sequence until I finally hit the correct alignment of values." It wasn't a persistence alone. It wasn't pure luck. It was traversal through a deterministic system until the correct conditions lined up. And once you see it like this, the Golden Chocobo stops being a symbol of luck and becomes what it really is: a checkpoint hidden inside a mathematical sequence you were always moving through. What most players don't realize is by this point, Final Fantasy VII is no longer operating on luck. Every system involved in Chocobo breeding is now tied together, not by chance, but by state. Before anything can happen, the game requires a fully prepared breeding environment. The Chocobo Ranch becomes the central hub of the entire system. Each Chocobo you obtain is not just a temporary companion, it becomes a tracked variable inside the breeding system. Alongside this, basic feeding items are collected. These do not directly alter the outcomes, but they modify the Chocobo's condition, a hidden factor that contributes how the system evaluates them over time. Then there are the rare breeding materials. These items are not optional rewards, they're inputs. Each one exists to unlock a specific branch of the breeding logic, allowing certain combinations to even be considered by the game in the first place. The Chocobos themselves are not random creatures. They are generated from specific encounter conditions tied to location and enemy formations. What appears to the player as simple as battle is actually the game selecting from a hidden table of Chocobo types based on where and how the encounter occurs. Different regions produce different classifications, and only certain classifications are valid for progression. Once captured and placed into the ranch, Chocobos become persistent entries within the breeding system, and at this point, the game begins evaluating them not as individual creatures, but as part of a larger calculation. Each future breeding result is influenced by the internal compatibility values, Chocobo classification types, item selection during breeding, and the ongoing progression of the game's internal random number sequence. Nothing is evaluated in isolation, and every outcome is a continuation. This is where most players misunderstand what is happening. Reloading, repeating attempts, or re-entering the ranch does not create a fresh roll. It only changes the position of the system within its existing sequence. The game is not generating new randomness. It is continuing forward through the deterministic chain of values, which means every attempt is part of the same unfolding process. At this stage, the Chocobo breeding stops behaving like a gamble and starts behaving like a state machine. Each result depends entirely on what Chocobos currently exist in the system, what inputs are applied at the moment of the evaluation, and where the game currently sits in its internal sequence of values. The system does not ask, will this work? It asks, given everything that already exists, what is the next valid outcome? Once the correct combinations begin to form, the system begins producing new generations of Chocobos, each one unlocking deeper layers of the breeding logic, until eventually two specific lineages converge, not through luck, but through progression. At the final stage of the system, something important happens. The game no longer cares about the history of attempts, it only evaluates the current configuration, and if every condition aligns correctly, it produces the rarest possible outcome within the system. A golden chocobo. And once you understand that, the entire process changes, because what looks like grinding was never really repetition. It was progression through a system you were already moving through from the moment the game began. And just like that, one of the rarest creatures in Final Fantasy VII is yours. For years, players believed that the Golden Chocobo was simply the reward for endless grinding, hours of racing, countless resets, and a little bit of luck. But beneath the surface, the PlayStation version of Final Fantasy VII was doing something far more fascinating. Every encounter, every battle, every breeding attempt, and every decision was part of a deterministic system quietly progressing in the background. The Golden Chocobo isn't proof that you got lucky, it's proof that you satisfied every condition that the game was waiting for. Once you understand how those systems work together, Final Fantasy VII stops feeling random and starts revealing just how cleverly it was designed. Nearly 30 years after its release, players are still discovering new ways to understand, optimize, and appreciate one of the gaming's most iconic RPGs. And that's part of what makes Final Fantasy VII so special. Thank you for watching.